Welcome to the final broadcast in the series of Romantic Festival concerts recorded in Clues Memorial Hall on the campus of Butler University. A presentation during May 1973 of the Jordan College of Music, Frank Cooper, director. It should be mentioned that Mr. Cooper is head of the piano department at the college, the Romantic Festival his brainchild, and he its director for the past 6 seasons. During the course of these broadcasts, we've outlined in some detail the why and wherefore. Mr. Cooper has been heard, for example, with the fascinating story of its origin, of the need for such music to be heard, and of the broad acceptance these yearly events have come to enjoy. No more persuasive argument could be advanced, it seems to me, for the why do it at all aspect than the truly remarkable recital you are about to hear. The distinguished Cuban-American pianist, Mr. Jorge Bolet, will play 8 transcriptions of the music of Bizet, MENDELSSOHN, Fritz Kreisler, and a number of Russian composers, all made famous by SERGEI RACHMANINOFF, who composed and played them during his career as a concert pianist. In addition, Mr. Bolet will offer 3 transcriptions of Franz Liszt, the well-known Petrarca sonnets, which were originally written as songs in 1838-39, later transcribed for the piano. Finally, we'll hear the ne plus ultra of Liszt transcriptions, and perhaps of all transcriptions by anyone, the Tannhäuser Overture of Richard Wagner. Mr. Bolet graciously consented to an interview earlier this evening, and we'll hear that informative chat with this great artist during the intermission. No point in repeating details of his early years of his schooling, study under a number of famous artists, and so on. That will be contained in the interview. Rather, I'd like to note one of the things I couldn't somehow manage to get him to discuss during the talk you'll hear. When you hear the fabulous technical command, the superior musicality displayed, for example, in some of the Rachmaninoff transcriptions, certainly in the Liszt pieces, you'll wonder why this pianist is not as well known and universally loved as, say, Arthur Rubinstein or Rudolf Serkin, as admired, regarded with awe, perhaps, as is Vladimir Horowitz, as internationally celebrated as Richter, Gilels, and others. The answers are not easy to ascertain, but I think lie chiefly in the area of promotion, and I believe I do not presume in making such a statement. Mr. Bolet is a rather self-effacing person, to my mind. He prefers to allow the music to speak for itself, leaving each listener to judge for himself the effectiveness of his performance. Thus no elaborate gestures. Piano theatrics, one critic has called them. Simply a superior musical mind and superbly controlled fingers, wholly dedicated to the service of the composer and his inspiration. Jorge Bolet begins his recital of the transcriptions of SERGEI RACHMANINOFF with a very well-known melody indeed, the Minuet from Georges Bizet's incidental music to Daudet's play, La Lésienne, the Woman of Arles. And now our soloist is coming on stage, bows in friendly fashion to the audience, seats himself at the Baldwin SD-10, and begins an unforgettable evening. The Minuet from Bizet's L'Arlésienne in the transcription of SERGEI RACHMANINOFF, performed by Jorge Bolet. Incidentally, Mr. Bolet remains on stage throughout the entire first half of the program, acknowledging briefly the applause between selections and then continuing. We'll thus be able to combine some of them, as the pauses between them are quite brief. For example, next the Polka de WR of Rachmaninoff, and Modest Mussorgsky's Hopak from the opera The Fair Sorochinsky. Transcriptions of SERGEI RACHMANINOFF, played by Jorge Bolet. Hopak from MUSSORGSKY's opera The Fair at Sorochinsky, just heard. Before that, Polka de WR, written after a supposedly original tune played by his father Vasily. Recent scholarship has established that it was actually the work of an obscure German composer, heard someplace by Rachmaninoff's father, played often, familiar to the young Russian artist, eventually reworked by him in leveling tribute to Papa. Mr. Bolet seated again to offer now the quietly lovely Lullaby of Tchaikovsky and the virtuosic Flight of the Bumblebee of Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov. from Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov's fairy tale opera, The Tale of Tsar Sultan, The Flight of the Bumblebee. Before that, Lullaby of Piotr Ilyich Tchaikovsky. Transcriptions of SERGEI RACHMANINOFF, played by Jorge Bolet. Next, one of the most delightful of all, the wistful Scherzo from A Midsummer Night's Dream of Felix Mendelssohn. Here again is Mr. Bolet. Jorge Bolet, pianist extraordinary in the music of Mendelssohn, as transcribed by SERGEI RACHMANINOFF, the Scherzo from A Midsummer Night's Dream. To conclude his presentation of the transcriptions of SERGEI RACHMANINOFF, two of the most interesting and the most unusual in terms of the working out of the original melodies. I refer to the Liebesleid, Love's Sorrow, and Liebesfreud, Love's Joy of Fritz Kreisler. Again, Jorge Bolet. You've been listening to the extraordinary interpretive art of Jorge Bolet. The transcriptions of SERGEI RACHMANINOFF, Liebesfreud, Love's Joy, just heard. Before that, Liebesleid, Love's Sorrow. Original compositions of violinist Fritz Kreisler. Mr. Bolet is standing, bowing in the center of the stage here at Clues Memorial Hall, the audience warmly applauding. Now he's going off. He's back again, now smiling broadly, the audience most enthusiastic. You can hear a number of well-deserved bravos for Jorge Bolet, our inspired interpreter on this evening of the Romantic Festival on the campus of Butler University in Indianapolis. Returning again. More bows. Now our soloist leaves the stage for a final time. It's intermission time here at Clues Hall, and also time for our local stations to identify themselves. This is NPR, National Public Radio. The audience is moving about both inside and out of the Clues Memorial Hall, and while they're chatting, refreshing themselves, may I invite you to listen to an interview recorded with Jorge Bolet just before tonight's concert. This is Albert Petrak speaking to you from Lilly Hall on the campus of Butler University. Our guest this evening is the distinguished American pianist, Mr. Jorge Bolet. Mr. Bolet, before I say anything else, you're also called George. Do you prefer that?
In the United States, practically everybody calls me George. Jorge is awfully difficult for Americans to pronounce.
Right. Mr. Bolet was a child prodigy, I think it would be fair to say. At age 5 in Havana, he attended a concert given by the late Dr. Rudolf Ganz and was so impressed that he decided to make a career for himself as a pianist. His progress was rapid. He studied at the Curtis Institute with David Saperton, and later there was a connection with conducting in which he had an opportunity to study with Boris Goldovsky and Fritz Reiner, but we can get into that a little later. I find that your career is a strange one, sir, to my view, in that you began as a pianist clearly because you wanted to be, and I know that you were an outstanding pianist, and then suddenly you decided to switch horses, as they say, in midstream. What caused this?
Oh, no, I never really wanted to be a conductor.
Ah. But you did study conducting under both Mr. Goldovsky and the late Fritz Reiner.
Well, yes.
But it was just a matter of...
I was just curious about conducting, and I wanted to know just exactly what conducting was all about. And,
But you never pursued it as a serious
No,
career
I never had any intention
of
of becoming a conductor.
I understand. The reason that I specifically asked you that question was because I remember with great pleasure, and I think I'm right about the years, approximately 57, 58, or 59, when you recorded for RCA some, I believe 9, of the Études d'exécution transcendante.
Yes, that's
And
right.
I said, this is a fantastic pianist. And then I don't believe there were additional discs, possibly 1 or 2, and then suddenly nothing. What happened at that point?
Well, that was the only record I recorded for RCA.
Mm-hmm.
They, at that time, were not interested in recording anything else, so then I recorded for Everest after that.
Yes, then you made the recording of the Liszt piano pieces.
Yes.
Your connection with Liszt goes back a fair distance. Do you consider yourself a Liszt specialist? Would that be fair to say?
I don't like to think of myself as a specialist of any kind, because to me, a specialist has been always someone who plays everything so much worse.
Oh, it's an interesting way to put it.
If I have been sort of tagged as a Liszt specialist, I would say is due to the fact that when I played the soundtrack for the Columbia film Song Without End, that was the life of Liszt, and in the mind of the average viewer, I played the soundtrack which of course was not composed exclusively of Liszt's music, because in that soundtrack I played Mendelssohn, I played Beethoven, I played Chopin, of course I played some pieces of Liszt. And somehow or other I was asked to play Liszt and asked to play Liszt, and now everyone expects me to play Liszt, so I play Liszt. I love to play Liszt. I always had a good sizable Liszt repertoire, so it's...
Have you played through, at any rate, most of the compositions
Of Liszt?
Liszt, yes.
Oh, heavens, no.
I suppose that's...
No, I don't think there's any human who could learn the complete Liszt repertoire.
There are 56 operatic paraphrases.
It's just
as I recall.
too extensive.
Yes, right. Would you say that you have, other than this willy-nilly Liszt specialization, if you want to call it that, an attraction in general to romantic music as opposed to any other kind, or a predilection to play that if you have a chance or an option?
Well, I think if you consider the pianistic literature overall, the most extensive and the richest literature comes from the Romantic period. Therefore, out of sheer volume, the Romantic period, of course, is an ideal period to concentrate your forces in. If I play more Romantic music than other styles, it's because I have again had a great deal of success with that style of music, and my public sort of expects it and demands it, so
you play it.
So I play it.
I was fascinated to read that you were a student of David Saperton. This is a man about whom I don't think very much is now known, since I know that he retired many years ago. However, I came across his name years ago when he recorded, again for RCA, but this is in the days of 78, one of those artistic metamorphoses that Godowsky did, and I think it may well have been on Triana of Albéniz.
Yes.
Are you familiar with that, sir?
Yes.
Do you recall the recording?
Yes, I recall a great many recordings that he did.
Yes, because
perhaps not all for RCA, but he recorded a good sizable Godowsky repertoire for Cap Records, I recall.
Yes, he did. Right. And all those are collector's items, all of them. Did the fascination for that rub off on you in any way? Have you played any fair-sized portion of the Godowsky transcriptions or original compositions?
Oh yes, I studied a tremendous amount of Godowsky's music. I played a great deal of his music for him while he was alive, and I have even given an all Godowsky recital.
When I was in New York, I had the pleasure of interviewing the late pianist's son, and asked him the question at the time, because I was then working for a radio station, that I assume he'd been asked before, because his answer was very ready. I said, "Can your father's music be played?" And he said, "Yes, because of course my father played it. But other than that, and Mr. Saperton's work and a few other pianists, not many tackle it. It is really so fiendishly difficult, is it not?"
Yes, I think there are several reasons why the music of Godowsky is not played more today. First and foremost, of course, is because it is frightfully difficult. Godowsky's approach to composition and the piano is rather unique. I think, in a way, he really advanced the art and the mechanics of piano playing probably 50, 75 years.
Sure.
And somehow or other, present-day pianists have not quite caught up to that. Secondly, the name Leopold Godowsky in the musical world is not a very nice one. By that I mean that there is a great animosity to anything that Godowsky ever wrote, for the simple reason that he did write a great many transcriptions of very great works, especially his 6 piano adaptations. I don't know whether the word transcription would apply, of 3 of the Bach partitas for violin alone, unaccompanied, and the 3 of the cello suites for cello alone, unaccompanied. Then his 57 studies on the 27 Chopin etudes also. These works were considered by a great many of the so-called purists to have been so much tampering with sacrosanct music, which they just can't conceive and they can't accept, and they therefore seem to reject his total output, and they dismiss him as just being someone who is, well, anathema, let's say. That and the difficulty entailed in playing any of his music. I mean, even the simplest of a composition of Godowsky's is really very, very complex and mechanically extremely difficult. And there are some things that he wrote that I believe are really unplayable. Really unplayable. There are 2 or 3 of the Chopin etudes which I have never been able to even, read through with any amount of speed. And I think in tempo they just can't be played. At least we haven't developed the super pianist that is able to play those works.
It leads me rather naturally to the transcriptions which we're hearing on tonight's performance, the Rachmaninoff transcriptions, which you, to my memory, seem to be the only contemporary pianist who's given them any attention. Rachmaninoff, of course, composed and recorded most of them, and we know them from his recordings. They're all still available, or will be shortly. But no one else seems to be. How do you view the transcription in a general way, and the Rachmaninoff things in particular? Do you feel them to be viable?
I'm not allergic to transcriptions at all. I'm very fond of them, as a matter of fact. I believe that if a writer has the right to quote at length from other writers, a musician is certainly more than justified in not necessarily quoting verbatim, but using another musician's ideas and imposing some of his own ideas on that work. It is not plagiarism, because full credit is given to the original composer, and I don't see anything wrong or unethical or aesthetically objectionable at all in taking a wonderful piece that a composer wrote for orchestra and playing it on the piano, as long as it is very well done and from a pianistic point of view a good piece.
Some of them are failures, in my opinion. When you specifically said pianistic, I'm thinking of Beethoven's transcription of his lone violin concerto. It just doesn't somehow come off. It doesn't sound right pianistically. Do you
No,
share
because
that
he
opinion?
didn't make a piano piece out of it.
Exactly so.
He just has the one voice violin part
Right.
played on the keyboard, and that's not a transcription. That's not a
Right.
that is a transposition
Yes.
of from one instrument to another.
Mhm.
Although he did write a marvelous cadenza with the.
Yes, the cadenzas.
Yes.
I find the most interesting part of it.
Well, that's very great because there he elaborated more or less on his own without using the violin.
Are you familiar, I rather imagine that you have at least heard disc recordings of them, with the recordings made by the late Joseph Hoffmann and Ignaz Friedman of the work which will conclude this evening's recital, the Tannhäuser Overture of Wagner? Have you ever heard those?
I heard Hoffmann play the Tannhäuser in person.
Ah.
I don't know of any recording of Hoffmann of that work.
I should have added from piano rolls.
From piano rolls.
From the duo art.
Well, I don't know. I don't think that would be a very good way of even imagining what Hoffmann did with the piece. The only recording I know of that work is the Moisevich recording, which is a very wonderful
Yes,
one,
it is. I've heard that before.
which the International Piano Library has issued recently.
Right.
The Friedman recording, I don't know either.
He did it for duo art, which was the other
Oh,
reproducing
another.
company. Another piano roll. Right?
Piano roll.
Hoffmann did
Well,
it very
there
early
again, I
for the
think it would
Emperor.
be a very poor approximation of Friedman's great art.
Well, sir, we could go on, I'm sure, but our time is running out. I'd like to thank you personally for taking the time this evening to speak with us. Our guest has been the distinguished American pianist, Mr. Jorge Bolet. And now back to Clues Hall and the resumption of this evening's concert. Thank you.